Good day, everyone. My name is Rich Chester, and I'm the Director of Business Intelligence at LPA Software Solutions. It's my pleasure to be with you today to talk to you about what's new in Cognos Analytics 11.1 data modules. Today's webinar, like all our webinars, is being recorded, and you can pick up any previously presented webinar from our website, www.lpa.com, in our resources section. There you'll find our entire series of what's new in Cognos Analytics, going all the way back to release 11.0.0. In addition, you'll find some deep dives on some business intelligence technical concepts like data modules, dashboards, and stories. You'll also find case study-oriented analytics webinars like analytics in the manufacturing industry, for example. And finally, you'll also find deep dives in other technical areas that LPA specializes in, including financial performance management, information management, and advanced analytics, such as predictive analytics with SPSS Modeler. We hope that as you continue on your analytics journey, you'll find that this collection of videos, available both on our website and on YouTube, help you and becomes a valuable education asset for your organization. While you travel on your analytics journey, you might find you need some help from time to time, and LPA would be pleased and proud to earn your business. In the business intelligence area, you might need some help perhaps with upgrading or migrating from an earlier version of IBM Cognos to the current version, whether that earlier version is Series 7 or is version 8 or version 10. That help might include installing and configuring, could include upgrading your models, could it be helping you test your content, either in an automated fashion or a manual fashion, depending on your needs, and also could include go live support as you roll out the new release to your customer base. Perhaps you find that the day-to-day care and feeding of Cognos Analytics is not where you wish your scarce IT resources to focus, and instead you'd like to outsource those to a vendor like LPA. LPA has a comprehensive set of managed services that we offer that would include outsourcing some or all of your administrative activities for IBM Cognos. It might even include the creation of a help desk or perhaps providing how-to support or development support to your end users. You might find that you simply have a backlog of reports that need to be written. LPA can help. We have a proprietary methodology that guarantees rapid but accurate delivery of reports, whether those reports are existing reports in other technologies or whether these are brand new reports for which you have specs. And even if you don't have specs, LPA can help you document the specifications for your new reports and then help you write them to get them completed on time, accurately, and without a hassle. Sometimes when you're upgrading, you'd like to know if the foundation that you're building upon is a nice solid foundation. If that's the case, then maybe an LPA health check makes sense for you. During a health check, we go in and we examine a standard set of things, how you've installed Cognos, how you've configured and tuned it, and we look at that versus our best practices, the practices that we know work after over 15 years of delivery of IBM Cognos services in the business intelligence space. On top of that, if you have particular areas of concern, perhaps you're concerned about a model that's not performing well, or perhaps you've got a very complex set of reports or dashboards that are running very slowly, or maybe you wonder if the data lake or the data level of your assets, whether that's your OLTP or whether that's your data warehouse, are organized optimally for your reporting needs. We can add examination of those items to the health check, truly tailoring it to those things that concern you, and provide you with a concrete set of recommendations and results, and, if you wish, help you implement those recommendations as part of a project. And finally, perhaps you just need to train your users. Perhaps you have to train your IT department in administration of the new environment or the upgraded environment. Perhaps you need to train some authors, whether those authors are using cubes as data sources or relational data as data sources. Perhaps you'd like to employ some of the new IBM Cognos 11 capabilities, such as dashboards and data modules, and uploading files and analyzing them. Perhaps you need some modeling training in Framework Manager or data modules or dynamic cubes. Whatever your training needs are in business intelligence, LPA has a class for you. Again, LPA would be proud and honored to earn your business. So if you do have some needs like this, please reach out to us. Either put a text in as part of the webinar through the chat feature, or reach out to me. My email address is rchester@lpa.com, or you can reach out more generically to sales@lpa.com. Now moving on to what's new in Cognos Analytics data modules in this release 11.1. As we go, you might find you have some questions. Please go ahead and submit those through the WebEx chat feature while we present today. At the end of the session, I will try to reserve some time to answer any of the questions that you've submitted. Any questions you submit that I don't have a chance to answer while we're on the air, I will answer via email. And frequent attendees of my webinars know I do tend to try to fit in as much information as possible, and I often don't leave a lot of time for questions at the end. But I will answer every single one you submit via email after the webinar is over. So please submit those as we go. Our agenda today is we're going to discuss the data module enhancements. I'll articulate what the enhancements are, and then after talking about a few of them, I will interleave a demonstration. There may be more enhancements than we have time to demonstrate today. I will keep an eye on the clock. I'm going to try to leave some time for questions and answers. I will go as many of those as I can and then answer the rest afterwards via email. So let's jump in to some of the new features in the data modules tool. Now, I do want to say that this webinar is not about an introduction to data modules. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on what they are or why you would use them. I would direct you to our existing data module webinar out on our YouTube channel or out on our website, which would be What's New in Data Modules. So if you look up that'll give you a bit more of a basic introduction, as well as introduce you to the features that were part of 11.0. Today I'm focusing on the features that are new with 11.1. And one of the new features is the interface when you first launch and create a brand new data module. The way that you access your data sources has changed, and I think is a bit more optimal. Also, the way you access the intent-based modeling feature has changed. So as a reminder, intent-based modeling is where you select a data source, let's say a connection to a database known as a data server connection, and you type in a question or a statement that describes the analysis you want to do using that data source, and the tool will present you with a proposal of the tables from the data source that match that analysis. I'll show you how that works when we jump onto the demonstration in a moment. But that whole interface and accessing your data sources as well as that intent-based modeling tool has changed in this release. In addition, another change that I find extremely welcome is in the expression editor. So in 11.0, I was able to create both simple and complex calculations as part of my data module, and that is still absolutely true. But with the complex calculations, which were done through the expression editor, there wasn't a lot of help. There weren't a lot of buttons, let's say, that exposed, for example, the complete list of functions that let me do more than validate my expression. The new expression editor contains a lot of those helper tools, and so I'll do a demonstration with an expression editor type calculation, and we'll take a look at those helper tools in that new interface. And finally, before we do our first demonstration, I'm going to just tell you, you can create folders to organize your data module. Now, these folders could be a folder for you to place tables in that are part of your module. Let's organize your module into folders so that you can separate maybe multiple analyses supported by the same data module. The other thing you can do with folders is you could add a folder to a table in your data module and organize the columns that are part of that table. So perhaps you have a table with 100 items and it describes employees, and perhaps you want to do a folder that's employee demographics, and a folder that's employee address, and a folder that is employee salary history, or something along those lines, to organize your table to make it easier for your dashboard authors and your report authors to leverage that table and those analyses. So those are new features that I'd like to give you a look at right now. So I'm going to jump onto my 11.1 environment here, and I'm going to click New, Data Module, and show you this new interface for selecting your data sources. Notice that in the pop-up, I've got a number of buttons here on the left-hand side. The first button here to search for my content. This would allow me to search for packages, uploaded files, data sets I've created, data modules I've created. If I know where those items are that I want to use in my model, I could use my content or team content or recent to access those things, the data modules, data sets, uploaded files, packages, and so on. If I wish to use a database connection, a data server, that's what this next button is. It will show you the data servers available to you. Those would typically be set up by your administrator. And then finally, if I want to upload a file right now and use it in this data module as a source, I could do that here. I'm going to go ahead and leverage the access to a data server. I'm going to go to Great Outdoor Sales that my administrator has set up. And also my administrator has preloaded information about the Go Sales schema that is in the database that my Great Outdoor Sales data server points to. So I'm going to select that schema and click OK. At this point, I have two choices. I could just click on the Select Tables and click Next, and that will allow me just to pick the tables from that database I wish to use. I'm going to forego that option in favor of this option, this Discover Related Tables. This is that intent-based modeling tool I was describing. I'll click Next, and this gives me a chance to describe the analysis I'd like to do with this data module. I'm going to type in product type. Notice it's actually trying to give me some hints. Target. Now with that information, I'm going to click Go, and it's going to examine that data source, the tables in the schema I selected, and it's going to give me what is called a proposal. And this proposal would be the tables that, based on what I typed in, seem to match my needs for analysis. This proposal could include most of what I need, but maybe not all. It could include everything I need and a little more. This doesn't mean I don't need to know the data I need. This is a nice shortcut to get me to a particular list of tables to start with. I'll go ahead and click OK and add that to my data module. So here's my data module. The interface doesn't look like it's changed a lot, and I think, for the most part, that is true. The interface has not changed tremendously. I'm going to flip over to the Diagram tab. You'll notice that these joins, in addition to the tables that came in, these joins came in from the database. So that's a big helper as well. And I look at this table set here, and let's say that I notice that the order header information is not available. I'm going to go ahead and access that data source directly then, and just add the order header information here by dragging it over to my data module. And it will drop that in. And if there are joins available, it will join them. If not, then I will need to join it by hand. And this, again, this notion, this activity, this set of actions is not different as far as my data module is concerned. This is the same sort of thing I had to do in version 11.0. I'm going to go ahead and create a relationship between my header and the details. This Create Relationship screen is the same screen that you would find in 11.0.12, 11.0.13, even 11.0.11. It did change through the 11.0 series. Maybe 11.0.10 had a slightly different one. I can't remember when this interface was introduced, but by and large, this interface for most of us on the 11.0 track won't have changed. So I will click on the order number on both sides. One header has many details, which happens to be the default setting here. So I'll just match my selected columns and click OK and add the relationship I need. So the new interface for selecting your original data source and perhaps invoking the intent-based modeling feature has changed. The other thing I mentioned was the expression editor. So let's suppose that I need to create an expression that calculates the difference in days between the order date and the order close date. If I were to select these two guys and then invoke the context menu, you'll notice that create a calculation is not here. And that's because the simple calculation tool is not going to be able to operate on two dates. I need to use the expression editor. So I'm going to right click on the order header. I could also have clicked the More button. And I'm going to choose Create Calculation, which will pop up the new expression editor, which is what you see here. Now, if I know the function to use, I can just go ahead and start typing it in. And just like in 11.0, when I type in an underscore, all of the functions that begin with an underscore appear. That's absolutely not changed. What has changed, though, is over here on the left, I now have access to the complete list of functions available to me, including macro functions. So I'm going to do the calculation of the number of days between two dates. If I don't happen to know that that is the underscore days underscore between, I can look through the set of functions. That looks like what I might need. Notice the information down here on the bottom gives me an idea that yes, indeed, this is what I want. I can drag that function into my expression. Then I can go to my data, and you see because I right-clicked on order header to create this calculation, the order header table is what's presented here. I'm going to grab the close date and drop it in, and then I'm going to do a comma, and then I'm going to grab the order date. And now I'd like to see the results. I'd like to get a feel for how this calculation work. I can do that by using one of these helper buttons over here on the top right, specifically the preview button. So I'll click on preview, and it's going to validate my expression. And if my expression is valid, it's going to show me the results. So that's a new and very useful feature that's part of the expression editor, this preview button. I also do have a validate button. There was a link for validation in 11.0. It's now a button, which I think makes more sense up here on the top right. Another new feature is I could take the line that I'm on and ask the tool to make it a comment by clicking the comment button, and you see it puts 2 slashes. So with the expression editor, I now have the ability to embed comments in my expression. So if it's a particularly complex expression, I can show the value, the user, the maintainer, someone who is not me, let's say, who's trying to maintain this module, my thought process or document exactly what it is that I'm doing here. If I click it again, I can uncomment. I can also embed my own comments by typing my own // by the way. This next button is got a great name. It's like my favorite new Cognos word, prettify. Prettify means reformat my expression so that it's easier to read. So if I prettify this expression, it didn't change much in this case. It just used the uppercase version of the function. But let me see if I can. I'll make this change, and I'll hit prettify again. Let's see if we can get a better, more obvious result. So that's what the tool believes is the most readable version of this function. The more complex the function, the more valuable perhaps prettify will be. The next button is the high contrast mode button. It simply changes your background to black and your foreground to a lighter color to make it perhaps easier to read. And another easier to read notion is this notion of the font size. The default is 14, but if it's a little too hard for me to read, I can set it higher or I can set it lower to just change the font and make the expression editor just that much more usable. I'm going to change my calculation name, and I am going to OK. Well, let me validate it just to show you that the validation is shown there. This information button takes me back to the information pane here, which will give me the information specifically about the functions that I had selected. So it remembers I had selected the days between. So that's the new expression editor. A lot of helper tools now, which I think is a superb add. Let's look at folders just as our last demonstration before we look at some more enhancements. So from a folder perspective, I'm going to right click on order header and I'm going to choose create a new folder. You could also have clicked on the more button to get that context menu, and I'm going to call it keys, let's suppose. And I am going to take these codes here that I don't need visible to my users, except for special circumstances. So they're sort of seldom used items, let's suppose, when I create a dashboard or a report. Then I'm going to drag them into this folder. And then you see I still have access to them, and I could use them in joins and that sort of thing, for example. But now I've organized this view of my order header so that my dashboard and my report authors won't have to see those keys unless they open the folder because they need them. The other thing I could do, by the way, if I don't think they'll ever need the keys, is I could go to the properties for the keys folder, and I could hide it. So the folder will be hidden, which in turn means that all of the contents of the folder are hidden from my authors. I can also create folders at the module level. And I would do this, for example, to organize my module. Let's say that I have a product info folder, and I'd like all of my product info to be organized into that folder, making it very simple for my authors to find the product information they're looking for. Whoops, I missed one. Let me drop the product brand into there to finish this up. So new folders, updated expression editor, new way to specify the sources for my data module. Let's get back to the slides and look at another collection of information. And this is about creating new tables in my module, deriving these new tables either from items in my module already or by entering SQL. So it used to be in 11.0 that in order for me to leverage a table in my data module, it had to exist in one of my source types. It had to be in a data server schema or part of a previously built data module, or an uploaded file, or an existing data set. I couldn't derive new tables in the data module interface itself. Now I can. And there's two fundamental ways to do that. The first one would be to enter SQL that it would leverage to define a table and a collection of columns in that table based on your SQL. The other way is through this new table function, create new table function that's part of the interface, where I can click on one or more tables and then I have a number of options as to what I do with those tables to derive a brand new table. Maybe I'm going to make a copy of a table, and I'm going to do that example with you. Create a view of tables. I'll also do an example of that. A joined view. I'll do an example of that next. I'm not going to do examples of, but I will just tell you about unions, intersections, and exceptions. So these are operations on tables where the new table would either be the aggregate of rows from both of the operand tables, or it would be just the rows that are identical between the two tables I select, or it would be all the rows in table 1 that are not in table 2, depending on whether I do a union, an intersection, or an exception. If you're familiar with these functions in the reporting tool in terms of operating on your queries, they do identical things here in your data module, except that they're done in the data module, right? And what you get is a table that has the result of the operation. And for all three of those, the tables that you use for table 1 and table 2 have to be identically formed. They have to have the very same number of data items, columns in them. Those columns have to be in the exact same order. They don't have to have the same names, but they do have to have the same data types, same number of columns in the same order. But let's look at the SQL, the create a copy, the create a view, and the create a joined view capabilities. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to actually go to a different open data module. I'm going to go here with this module. So here's a module that I actually wrote in 11.0, and pulled up. It's got a bunch going on as far as slicing and dicing my targets and my sales, and allowing me to do an analysis there. But you'll notice that my product data is 3 separate tables. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually create one table called products that actually joins the data into a single table. So to do that, I can do that either here in the data module tab, or I can do it here in the diagram screen. I'm just going to select, actually, I'm going to select them in a particular order. You'll see why. Line type and product. Then I'll right click and choose create new table. And the new table tool will come up. Because I selected 3 tables, the only option available to me will be this create a view of tables. Every other entry requires either 1 or 2 tables to have been selected, not 3 or more. So I'll click create a view, I'll click next. It will allow me to name this view, so I'm going to call it products. And then I can select a subset of the columns that are in each table. And you'll note I did product line first because I wanted it listed first in the result. That's why the order mattered. I'm just going to undo some of the items here. I'll leave all of my product items. If I wished, I could click refresh and I would see all of the data from this aggregated table. I should say this amalgamated table. It's not really aggregating. It is doing the join between these 3 tables and producing a result as a brand new table. I won't spend our time doing that. I'll just show you now I have a products table that's been added to the module. Let me turn on so I don't have any grayed out tables. And then I would have to join this products table to my fact tables through the create relationship. So I could join it in so that I could use that products table to slice and dice my targets and my actuals. And then these 3 tables I would not want to expose to my end users anymore. Instead, I'd expose this table, which I've joined a target and sales fact. So these 3 tables I'm actually going to hide. I could put them in a folder and hide the folder, or I could simply select them and choose to hide them. That's a style thing. I think my style would probably be to create a folder called Hidden Things, hide the folder, and then drag these 3 guys into it. They have to remain part of my module, but they won't be visible to my users. Having joined products to target and sales fact, those are the objects that would be visible to my users. So that's one of the create new table options. Now, as it turns out, my sales are related to 3 different dates: the order date, the ship date, and the close date. And in 11.0, in order for me to actually have a time dimension for each, I would have had to do a bunch of work. There was no way for me to, say, reuse the very same table, which I happen to have renamed order date here, multiple times in my analysis. And that's what I can do now with the new table feature. I'm going to select order date, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to choose create new table. And in this case, I'm just going to create a copy of this table. I'll click next. Now, if I wish, I could actually, in my copy, remove some items that were in this order date object. I could. I don't have to. All I really have to do is give it a new date. So this is going to be ship date. I have to give it a new name. Let me try that again. I think you get the idea. Click Finish. It will add it to my data module, and then I can join it into my sales fact to now have a second copy of the time dimension. Now, I'll take advantage of the fact that I need to create a third copy to show you the sequel feature. So I'm going to go up to the top of my data module, right-click, and choose Create Table Using SQL. Up comes the SQL editor, and I could, I always forget to give things names, so I'm going to not forget that now. So close date. And then I can enter any SQL expression I want. I'm just going to enter a very simple expression. I have found that case and Syntax absolutely do matter here. So I believe I'm getting the case correct here, but it could be that I won't validate here, but let's find out. I'll click the validate button here, which will select. Could not find it. I think maybe I need this to be capitalized. Let's give that a go. Yep, so as I said, case does matter in this case. I could do a preview to see some data. As you can see, I have a lot of the same buttons that I had in the expression editor. I also can enter data in so if you're a framework modeler, you are very familiar with these three types of SQL you could use to define a query subject based on a select statement. Same options exist here in the data module to create a new table based on a select statement. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, which will add this new table to my data module. And then again, I could join it into my sales fact. And now I have leveraged the go time dim table 3 times in my model by deriving a copy of the go time dim I had previously added, and then leveraging SQL to access the table directly using SQL. So a lot of new ways to create objects in your model, creating new tables and or creating with SQL. The important thing is that they are independent objects, right? Just because I used these 3 objects which were previously joined to the target and the fact does not mean that I do not have to join the derived object, my products object, to these 2 guys. So this join between product and sales target and sales fact is not inherited by this new products, even though it used these 3 objects. It needs its own joins to the target and the fact. And these new tables, of course, would get joined as well. If you've taken my data modules class, you'll have heard me say this a number of times. Tables without joins are usually a mistake. It's usually the fact that you need to join at least to one other table to really make those tables usable in your module. So SQL and create new tables, powerful, powerful tools to enable me to model in my in the 11.1 release. Moving on. Support for relative dates. So many times when we do analyses, the analyses we have in mind are year to date, month to date, and maybe even examining information side by side with a to date in it. Like, let me take a look at my sales for current year. Let me compare them to last year. Let me look at quarter to date and the same quarter last year. Let me look at month to date and the same month last year. And if my data happens to have some future dates in it, I could even look at next month. So that's a very typical set of analyses. And they were not directly supported in data modules in previous releases, but they are directly supported now in data modules through the delivery of some pre-built calendars that are imported when you import the samples that are included with Cognos Analytics 11.1. And then you can leverage them, and I'll show you a bit about what's being imported and how to leverage them next. So I'm going to go back to my environment. I'm going to open up a data module which does not employ the relative time yet. Again, this was a data module I built in 11.0. But before I do that, I want to take you to Team Content and show you that when you import those 11.1 samples, you're going to get this calendar. And in this folder are 2 data modules, which you will actually leverage in order to implement this relative time, this X to date type functionality. These are modifiable after you bring them in. So even though the Gregorian calendar one, I imagine most folks will not modify, but the fiscal calendar ones that come in with a pre-built set of fiscal calendars, you're going to want to support your own fiscal calendar if it doesn't happen to be one of the ones in the samples. And so you may find that you're copying and modifying the fiscal calendar model, or perhaps creating new source files for other fiscal calendars over and above the ones that were delivered with the samples. By the way, there's a tool that includes a calendar generator report. This is just a quick way to generate a CSV that includes a bunch of date data. You specify the number of years you'd like to include. You give the month that your fiscal year starts on. So let's suppose that my fiscal year actually started on June 1st, 2018. The day doesn't matter. Whatever month you pick, the CSV will start on the first of that month. I didn't run this as a CSV just so I could quickly show you the first page of output. And then you would use this CSV as part of the definition of a new fiscal calendar. So you can create your own fiscal calendar, and they've got this nifty tool to get you started. But there's also a bunch of fiscal calendars included in the samples that you can leverage. Plus, if you don't use a fiscal calendar, or your fiscal calendar is exactly the same as the Gregorian calendar, we have that Gregorian calendar tool. I'm going to go ahead, now that I've shown you that, I'm going to go back to my model, which does not use relative time. And I'm going to add the Gregorian calendar data module and leverage it to implement this relative time technique. So let me add a new source. In this case, the source is that Gregorian calendar data module. So I'll click on Team Content and Calendars. Oh, by the way, I didn't show you this when we were here before, but if you have many, many things in a folder and you'd like to isolate to just a type of thing while you're looking for sources, that's what you can do over here. Also, you can use the modified date. So this can help you if you have folders that have many, many things in them to isolate to just a certain type of thing that have been modified in a certain time frame. In this case, I don't need to use it because there's only a couple of items in this folder, and Gregorian calendar is the one I'm going to add. So I'll add that Gregorian calendar data module as a source. Now, it pre-added the one table in that source. The sources list is here. It includes the Gregorian calendar. It contains exactly one table. Because it had contained exactly one table, when I added the source, it added that one table to my data module. Now, in this case, even though it's a single table, I'm not going to join it. So earlier I told you my rule of thumb: if there's a table in your data module that's not joined, it's probably a mistake, or at least it's probably an incomplete data module. In this case, these calendars don't get joined, so this is the exception to that rule. So now that I've added the calendar to the data module, how do I use it? Well, the first thing I do is identify a date to leverage against this calendar. So in my fact table under work, I have a date called work date. I'm going to enable the property sheet. And on the property sheet, there is a new entry called lookup reference. And what I do on the date that I wish to leverage with that calendar tool is I associate it to that calendar table. So rather than joining, I just associate a date to one of these calendars that I've added. Now you'll notice that workdate now has an expand button. And if I expand workdate, you'll see there's a whole bunch of filters that it has inherited from that Gregorian calendar module that implement filters for prior year, month to date this year, month to date from last month, current quarter, prior quarter to date. There's even more. Same month last year, same quarter last year, and so on. So I get all of these ability now just by doing what I did, and which you can see was very, very quick. I now inherit all of these filters that I could add to my report or my dashboard to filter items. But that's not all. The other thing I can do is on a measure, so I'm going to take my hours spent measure. On a measure, I can also use the lookup reference. And here you'll note that it's going to list all of the dates that I have previously associated with that calendar module. So work date is the only one I've done, so it's the only one listed. And now you'll see that hours spent has a collection of expandable measures. Now, these are measures that are now affiliated with all those same time frames that I described in the filters above. So in addition to the filters, which I could use to filter a report and everything on it to a particular time frame, I've also now got measures that are themselves calculated for a particular time frame, all based on order date, which I associated with that calendar data module. Now I'm going to go ahead and save the data module with these couple of changes in it. And just to illustrate how this relative time works in a report, I'm going to use my Try It button, and I'm going to write a report. I'm not going to explore the filters part. I'm just going to explore the measures part for right now, just in the interests of time. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to page design, because rather than using a list, I'd like to use a crosstab. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to name the crosstab or the query, but you know that I should name the crosstab and the query. I'm just going to do a very simple analysis. I'm going to expand my hours, and I'm going to just drag over a couple of items. So I'm going to grab hours spent. I'm going to grab last year hours. I'm going to grab this year hours. And I'm going to grab my current month and my prior month hours. And I'm going to drag those to the columns in my crosstab. I'm then going to just to quickly do an entry. I'm going to do states, and I'll go now back to page preview so you can see how it has leveraged now these special measures that were added to show me. So in this data, there's a bunch of blank information with no state on them that total 72, almost 7,300 hours. In Alaska, in total, we've spent 153 hours based on the data in this database. Last year, we did 63 of those roughly, and this year we've done 15 and a half of those, right? We worked in Arkansas at some point for a total of 386 hours, but none of those hours were last year or this year. If we look in Florida, we've got almost 10,000 hours associated with Florida in this data set. 2,400 of them last year, 2,200 of them this year. This month we did 43 and a half, but last month we did 354 of those. So you see the relative time, very, very simple to use, very, very simple to define, all based on the inclusion in the samples of the fiscal and Gregorian calendar add-ins and this new lookup reference component. So there's an additional set of capabilities in data modules. I'm not necessarily going to be able to demonstrate all of these, especially because I'd like to save some time for some questions. And there is one other demo I'd like to do. So I'll just describe data level security. So this only applies to the tables that come from a data server connection, so the direct connection to one of your databases. On any of those tables, and you do this in the source pane, not in the tables you've added to your data module. Instead, you do it on the tables that are available to be added in the source pane, not in the data module pane. You go to the More button, or you right-click there, and one of the options will be to apply data level security. The notion here is that based on your security groups in your authentication provider or in your Cognos namespace, you can create filters that, based on the logged in user and the logged in user's group membership, may apply to the logged in user. And if it does apply, then those filters, those where clauses, are automatically added to the reports and dashboards that leverage this data module. So it's very similar, I believe, to what is in Framework Manager from the point of view of you use groups or roles, and you associate filters to them, you can do a very similar thing now in data modules to implement data level security. In addition, there's an ability for you to turn on caching on one or more of the tables that are represented in your data module. So if you wish to load and then keep static the data for a certain table for a certain amount of time, you could load it and keep it static for 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days, because you can set the expiration of that cached information. You preload data for performance reasons by and large. You also could preload it just to save some wear and tear on the back-end database as people run reports. Maybe they only need data that's up to an hour old for the analysis to be valid, so you could cache the data in that table for up to an hour. That way you're not always hitting the back-end database for the analysis. Regardless of your reason for caching, there's a number of caching options that you can enable if you wish to enable them at all. And you specify for the table, do cache it, and for how long to keep the cache valid. And then column dependencies, which is the other demonstration I want to do for you very quickly before we get to questions. This, if you're a framework manager modeler, this is the notion of a determinant. If you're not a framework manager model, this is the notion of having multiple grains of data in your model. Let's take the example of a sales target stored by month and sales actuals stored by day. If I simply model so that I join those to my time dimension, the targets to the month characteristic, my actuals to the day characteristic, when I run a report, and I will get the wrong information for my sales targets because of the fact that the time dimension has one row per date. And so for each date in January, I'm going to get the very same month key. Well, when I join the target to that month key, it's going to effectively multiply that target by 31 for January, which is going to mean that all my target analyses from that data module will be invalid. I'm going to show you how to resolve that with this new column dependency feature as our last demonstration that it looks like I have time for if I go sort of fast. So I have a data module open here. I'm actually going to very quickly, oops, that's my try it report. I'm going to close this module here without saving and reopen it. It's just a better starting point for me for doing this analysis. So this is my my 11.0 model that had the target, and the fact they're joined to order date, my target is joined by the month key to my date dimension, and that would be shown right here. You know what? I could have just shown it here by clicking on the relationship. There you go. So either way, it's joined on month key. If I show you a report I wrote called Actuals and Targets, you're going to see that the actual total of my sales was 4.6 billion, and the actual total of my targets are 4.2 billion. But with that data module written as is, you see my target data is skewed. It's multiplied roughly by 30, right? Because of this problem with my order date time dimension, when I join by month, it's going to multiply by the number of days in the month, the target for that month. Not good stuff. So in 11.0, to fix that, I would have had to fix it manually. I would have had to do work either at the data level or in the calculation level or even in the report level to fix it. However, now I have this new capability called column dependencies that I can add to my data module. So I'm going to right-click on my order date, and I'm going to specify column dependencies. Now, Framework Manager modelers are going to recognize what I'm doing as creating the hierarchy that describes my date information and doing it in the order of that hierarchy, year, quarter, month, day, and just as I would do a determinant. For those of you who are not framework manager modelers, the concept is that the hierarchy of data in my order date table begins with years. Every date belongs to a month, which belongs to a quarter, which belongs to a year. So I start with the highest level, year. And then I tell the tool that quarters will come next. So I add quarters, and then I draw a line so that it shows that quarters come after years. And then months come in. So I'll bring in the month key. And again, I'll draw that line that shows the quarters then break down to months. And finally, my data breaks down to my day key, which represents 1 day each, and that's the lowest level of data in my time dimension. Now, at each of these levels, there may be some data that is unique. At the quarter level, for example, the current quarter data is the same for every value of quarter key. Even if quarter key repeats, this current quarter value is identical. Similarly, on every month, the month name, the month number, this current month, the number of days in the month, there's the month name. Those are those repeat for every value of month key, so I'll add those there. And you see this icon here by default. See, it's showing that it's repeating data here. However, day key does not repeat. So I'm going to change that setting to say that my day key is unique. And while there is a bunch of stuff that is also unique at the day level, just even with this incomplete change, identifying this hierarchy, identifying that if you join on month key, it's repeating data. So don't repeat the values. That's what this says. If I join on these keys, don't repeat the values. That's what this dependency technique is doing. When I join on day key, I don't have to worry about repeating the values. So my sales actuals will be fine. But I was repeating values by joining on month key. I'm going to hit save on this change. I'm going to go rerun my report as soon as the save takes. There we go. So I'll close actuals and target just so that I can rerun it quickly. Let me jump home and use my recent list to rerun actuals and target. And what I would expect to see now is that my data for my targets will now be correct. It will no longer be multiplying each target by the number of days in a month because those dependencies told the data module, hey, this is repeating data, don't repeat the data. That's effectively what it did. So now I have the right breakdown by year for my target. And when I put my data side by side, I can truly see whether I am ahead or behind of my target based on my actuals. So that's column dependencies. And it does look like I've gone fast enough, hopefully not to confuse you, but at least to answer a couple of questions. So I'm going to take a look at some of the questions. Oh, I apologize. There are a couple more features just to mention. You can put a data format now on your columns. So if you've got currency and you'd like to control the look and feel, if you've got numbers, if you've got dates, you have formatting functionality. It's very similar to formatting a column in a report in terms of you say, I want to format it. You click the format button. You choose a format like number or currency or date. You set some properties that control that visibility, and you are all set. Anytime that you use that data module and that formatted column, that will be the default format inherited by the dashboard or the report. Splitting columns, this is, let's suppose you bring in columns that have multiple pieces of data separated by some delimiter, like a comma. Maybe you have latitude and longitude. You have latitude, comma, longitude in the item, and you need to separate those because the way you map in Cognos Analytics is you need them as separate columns. So there's this new split columns feature in data modules where you say my delimiter is a comma, and it will allow you to split latitude into its own column and longitude into its own column, thus enabling with that data for you to create a a map in a dashboard or a report. So you can do split columns as part of your data prep activities that you can also do within your data module. Now, let's take a look at some questions. So I've been handed a list of questions here from the helpers that help these webinars actually happen. Thank you very much, Annie. Are there limits to the amount of data that a data module can return? That's a great question, in part because in 11.0, you did run into some performance issues, not so much with data servers. A data module against a data server, framework package against a data source. I didn't find much differences there, and I didn't have a lot of customers asking me about problems there with data servers. But with uploaded files and data sets, especially very, very large objects, those could be slow. And also joining those uploaded files and data sets with data in a data server could be slow depending on the data volumes on either side. In 11.1, there is now a coprocessor that's been added to the dynamic query engine. And that coprocessor is specifically designed to speed up the use of these large uploaded files and data sets. So when you launch Cognos 11.1, if you were to look at the services or the details of what's running on your server, you will actually now find additional Java processes that automatically get launched when you start up Cognos. You've always had the dispatcher process for that runs most of your services. With Cognos 10 in dynamic query mode, you got a second Java. That was the dynamic query engine. This is a third Java now that is this uploaded files and data sets coprocessor that really does help with speed, especially when you have very large sizes of these data sets and data modules. Do data modules replace Framework Manager? And there's a couple of more that look like they might be similar because I see Framework Manager on a couple of these as I glance down the list. So let me take the whole notion of data modules versus Framework Manager sort of as a big single question. Do they replace Framework Manager? No, not yet. Should I go out and rewrite all of my framework models as data modules? No, not the intent. Should I start brand new projects that I'm doing, modeling brand new data? Should I start doing those with data modules rather than Framework Manager? I'd say yes. I'd say that's exactly the right way to go. There's no end of life announced for Framework Manager. There's no specific date that's been bandied about, let alone is official for retiring Framework Manager. So there's no reason for you to go back and, if you will, revisit all of your existing functioning, working framework models. But as you begin to model new things, I think you'd agree the level of functionality in 11.1 is really, really close to being on par with the functionality in a framework model. You may very well find that data modules are a more expeditious and maybe even more attractive option than Framework Manager, because I think with the web-based interface, you'll find that more people will be able to model than the folks who are your Framework Manager models. So you'll maybe end up modeling faster, right? You'll get to that point in your queue faster. You cannot right now automate the creation of a framework, of a data module, whereas you can automate updates to a framework model. So folks who are embedding Cognos into software may not find data modules as usable yet, as my end user community, I think, absolutely will. There's other things like parameter maps in Framework Manager that are not yet in data modules. So I think the whole Framework Manager versus data module conversation is ongoing. But as an initial recommendation, I would say keep your framework models as is the general rule. And and if you're doing massive mods, maybe you consider converting them at that time. Anything you're modeling brand spanking new, or that you're going to model such that people are going to want to attach uploaded data, that's when I would jump right into data modules with no hesitation. And with all of this robustness that I hope you've gotten a feel for today, I think you're going to be very, very happy with the result. And I'm getting the high sign now that I am out of time. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much. I appreciate you joining me today. I hope you'll join us again on a future webinar. And I will answer the remaining questions that I see here that I didn't get to today via email. So have a wonderful set of holidays. And I am sure I will talk to you again very, very soon. Thanks so much.